Sweet scary art, coming for to scary me, boo.
Oh, boo! you faked me out. That's true.
Like
it's
all
a boo.
good parody songs, it just starts with a rhyme. Swing low, Creepshow. We're done. We got a podcast to record.
Bingo!
Let's print it.
We're back, baby.
Yeah,
the
dude.
Kings of the proverbial king.
Yes, the kings of king, if you will.
Yeah. Do my bidding podcast.
You're the peasants of king? We don't have an official name for the fans.
Yeah, what's the name
this.
for fans? The peasants.
The peasants of the king. This is a show where we talk about all things adapted to TV and film by way of the works of Mr. Stephen King, the most prolific and profitable, certainly horror author, potentially book author in the history of mankind.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's Abe Epperson.
Yeah, and that's Michael Swain.
Hey! And Creepshow came out in 1982, 3 whole years before I was born. But I'll tell you right out the gate, the first thing I want to say is just that I was obsessed with, because longtime listeners will know, sci-fi and horror tinge, definitely dark, but like written short story compilations were the first and are like my most abiding favorite form of art. Like just period, are like sci-fi short stories, but also I really wanted to be a comic artist as a kid. For similar reasons, I'm a huge fan of comic anthologies, specifically short stories. And I was obsessed with the Creepshow comic book. It took me like 20 years to see the movie, and I naturally assumed that the movie was based on the graphic novel, and the graphic novel was based on some Stephen King short stories I was unaware of. But none of that is true. It's much more interesting than that, I think. And we'll get into that as we dive in to Creep Show.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Yeah. We do that through 3 spectra, right? And the first one's no, that's Anderson's. Fuck me.
We do it to 4 spectra, really.
Not even spectra, dude.
I mean,
There's segments in this.
There's segments in this.
Yeah,
There's segments.
it's fine.
And the first one is Under the Dome.
Our best guess puts the dome at 20,000 feet, sir.
Did he just call it a dome?
You think we might be stuck in here a while?
This is where we talk about an elevator synopsis of the movie. As we mentioned, anthology movie. It's one wraparound story with 5 vignettes.
5 big radishes, yes.
And I wanted to make, you mentioned how it was kind of important to you, or like where you mentioned that you watched it 20 years later. I watched this, I had it as a VHS on at my house when I was a kid, and I watched the shit out of it. And I only later in life learned that it was something that was actually kind of a big deal. Like, it's not a cult. I mean, it's a cult following now just because it's in the past. It's 1982.
But highly successful at the time.
But it was very successful.
Yeah.
George Romero's only film to open at #1 at the weekend box office.
Like we see these little micro trends, of course, even to this day, but it was actually so lucrative that it spawned there. You know, in my research, they're like, it's the one, and I never put this together because I wasn't experiencing time in the flow at the time, but it's the one that spawned all these other movies that I'm aware of that are horror anthology movies. And the thing I was reading was like, yeah. So horror anthology movies all failed other than Creepshow, and Creepshow came first, and that's why there was this little trend from like 82 to 89 of trying to do these horror anthologies, and they never worked and people gave up. But Creepshow actually was not just successful, but so successful that it had a bunch of imitators.
But they're beloved by nerds in the modern age, and
like us.
And so let's get into it. Let's just start talking about what that is. It starts with the wraparound story, and by that I mean there's a scene at the beginning and a scene at the end, bookends to the vignettes or the the segments. It starts with a mustacheless Tom Atkins. You know Tom Atkins, right? Are you a fan of Tom?
Inventor of the Atkins diet.
Yeah.
The meat guy.
And he's beating the shit out of his
beefy.
kid because he found him with a comic book entitled Creepshow, which
ably played by Joe Hill, who is Stephen King's son, but also now has grown up to be legitimately a horror author in his own right. Like, I think he wrote The Black Phone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's a real creepy kid. He's
getting slapped.
Yeah, he's getting slapped.
Slapped around.
Obviously, Stephen King was worried about that, which is something that I just like the idea.
We'll
of
get to that
cast my
trivia
kid,
later.
cast my kid, and slap him around
Slap him around, Tom Atkins. I also just want to say to people this resonates for, the framing device is identical to. Like, if I played these three things from the 80s, early 90s back to back, I'd be like, which is which? It's identical to the premise of the We're Not Gonna Take It Twisted Sister music video. It's also identical to the premise of the Michael Jackson video. It doesn't matter if you're black or white. It's just dad doesn't understand. But instead of like a cool record of pop music, this time it's a horror comic, right? And he's like, what is this shit? Etc.
That's
as you'd expect.
Yeah, the kid is, Joe Hill's clearly a demon. Like,
he's a gaslighter, bro.
Yeah.
He hits him and he goes, he's mad. He's clearly mad. And then he goes, I'm throwing it away. And he goes, I'm sorry, Daddy. Please forgive me. Please don't throw it. And you're like, this kid's actually pretty creepy.
That's a demon.
That's a demon boy.
But it's also, I like it has this tinge for like younger viewers who are just like, because that's what they want to get. They want to get the youngins as young as they can get, obviously. Right. And it's like they know that they're influenced by content like this movie. So they're basically like, not your dad's stories. We're going straight to hell. Woo! So they're like trying to get their cachet, their cool on, which is real.
That's right.
In hindsight, it reads really like, I don't know. Like, it's pretty milquetoast.
Like extreme. Well, it's the beginning of the extreme 90s corporations trying too hard to be like, hey, fellow kids, we ride skateboards, buy our shit. Yeah,
we're super cool.
But a couple things I do want to say about this scene. The dad says, and I totally understand that, like, the context of words change, but a movie people know I love is Bad Santa, where Santa has anal sex with a woman in the women's big and tall changing room as like a key plot point, and says this exact phrasing, so it's stuck in my head as that. But the dad says to the kid, next time I find you with a comic like this, you ain't gonna sit right for a week, buddy boy. I'm like, that dad's gonna fuck his kid in the ass.
Because the Bad Santa. That's what Bad Santa did.
But I also want to point out that as he throws the comic away, lightning crashes. And there's like, that will happen in this movie 3 times, I think. A point will be
more than that,
like underscored by lightning crash, which
at
is
least
so funny.
3. I'm pretty sure I can remember like 5 or 6 or 90.
It's immediately interesting about this movie, right? I'll save it for it. But when it's a bunch of short stories, how much can you vary your bag of tricks? Where do they overlap? Where do they not? But yeah.
Indeed. Then we see, because we focus on an insert of the comic book, as you mentioned, we get this rad horror comic art, which kind of, stitches everything together. It's the tissue between the movie of all the first story. I don't know. You're a big art guy. Do you want to have any words on that?
Some of them are reminiscent of the graphic novel. The graphic novel, which I think is a Bernie Wrightson, I believe, or at least he may have done the cover. Fucking incredible artist, by the way. Bernie Wrightson's zombie art, I think to this day, is like unmatched in my heart. So I would say it's like a simplified version of that. The only thing I'll say just to clarify is that every story is surrounded by the fact that it live action becomes a cartoon. The cartoon pans across the comic, or a page blows and turns, and we zoom in on a new story, and then it becomes live action, right? So you got it.
Yeah.
And the other thing I want to say about that is gone from my mind. Great. There's something about the art. I'll think of it again later.
You'll think of it later. We'll talk about the art a few times. But anyway, let's move on to the first story, which is entitled Father's Day. And let's set the stage because there's a little bit of... It took me a little bit to figure it out. I always know like the status relationships, but I actually wanted to dial down exactly who these people are because it's a group of people. It's an aunt, a niece, and they're all adult age and older, a nephew, and the niece's new husband or fiance, who was played by Ed Harris. We're going to drop some names every now and then throughout this podcast because if you haven't seen this movie, man, it's got a kind of a stat cast for the early 80s before people were really
Part
big.
of what makes the anthology great, right? You get Ted Danson for 2 days and you got a segment. Yeah.
Exactly. And they're talking about this. The first scene is they're talking about the history of the family, and they're talking specifically about the aunt's sister. So like another aunt. I think the niece and nephew, it's not like Bedelia, who they're talking about, great aunt Bedelia, is the mother of the niece and the nephew, nor is the aunt, I don't think, that is telling the story initially. So it's very confusing. There's a third
and it
sibling
barely
somewhere.
matters ultimately.
It doesn't matter.
Like they're all
but
about
it's
to
like,
die.
It's just an unnecessarily
rich-
confusing setup to me.
They're rich socialite pieces of shit, Arrested
they are.
Development type,
Right.
shallow, fake people. I remember what I was going to say,
Yeah.
which was just that we got to point out that the dad's point is that the comic book is evil and corrupting, and you shouldn't fuck with evil stuff like that, which is presented as like, where does this dad get off? He's fucking square. But the dad's literally right in every sense. His child is a corrupted, evil, fucked up kid, and all the magic stuff is true. Like it works and happens.
I don't know if I agree with that because that's the thing. We don't know the specifics. He beats his kid. This is just the way the kid gets back at him.
He enjoys a nice cool beer while he sits in an armchair and stares at the wall. That's also what I love.
Yeah,
he just sits there and drinks a beer.
He's just, I am terrible
God made
parental
fathers,
unit.
babe.
Yeah, it's amazing. But back to the first story. Yes, they tell the story about how their great aunt Bedelia.
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 I know because I was raised on the Amelia Bedelia books. But yeah,
there you go. Bedelia.
Her tragic story, how she snapped and killed the patriarch, who was an awful piece of shit.
With an ashtray.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a real piece of shit, just like Tom Atkins. And he is large, and this is largely considered to be a good thing.
But ever since, she's been considered insane as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she comes back once a year on Father's Day, which was also the day she killed him. It's very Are You Afraid of the Dark in the telling of it. She comes back every day on every year on Father's Day
A ritual.
to go to his grave and basically cuss him out and be like, you bastard. And her ultimate gripe with him was that she was this reclusive spinster type, and the one man she ever dared love, he had murdered because he's rich and he just is a evil man. He just didn't like him or whatever. Didn't cotton to him. Yeah.
And notably, she brings a flower
to the grave. She has the complicated, right? It's still her father, and he abused her, so she had Stockholm syndrome to some degree.
Right. So it's complex. But I do like the added thing of she puts down flower, which is like, kind of middle of the road flowers. I don't know the flower names or what brands of flower there are.
So
but she pulls
fuck me, I guess.
So fuck me, I guess. But she, out of the little, vase that they have there, the stone vase for flowers in front of the tombstone, she removes first like an identical but also withered, kind of husk of flowers. And so it implies that not only does she have that Stockholm syndrome thing because she's there as an antithesis to the very thing of like, paying respect, but she's the only one who does it. And that's something else.
And as you might expect, almost for no reason. That's what I like about a short story sometimes is there's no umbrella corporation. There's no fungus that mutated because of climate change.
Happened.
The dad's just so evil that he's a zombie. Like he's alive still because you can't stop how fucked up he is. Or whatever.
I like that there's an insert shot of her dropping her like Jim Beam whiskey bottle.
Yes, there is a slight argument there. Yeah.
I would argue that the dude just wants to get wet, dude.
Well, it's supposedly a reference to there is a legend, I think Irish, but it's you probably read the same thing I read, but it means water of life in Gaelic. Is that it? Whatever.
Gaelic is Scottish.
Gaelic.
Gaelic is Irish.
Thank you. Gaelic. Mm-hmm. I don't know the Irish one, the ancient Irish one, Celtic. Mm-hmm. Fuck me.
Let's just move on.
I love the idea that there's someone in Ireland listening to this who's just like, that's it for me. I'm out, dog.
I'm out, dog. This is fucked up. These two guys don't know shit about it.
And I wouldn't blame them. But the point is, there's some legend or folklore that, pouring whiskey on a grave made a dude come back to life, and it could have been a reference to that. Who knows? And we'll discuss that more later
Feels
because
like
of the
a
way
joke.
the film was put
It
together.
feels like an old joke to me, but
But
yeah.
regardless, I would say most people who watch the movie will probably just scan it as he's such an evil bastard. He's a zombie now. Who
Right, that's
cares?
the kind of
Yeah.
low yield thinking they want you to watch this. This is
Right.
supposed to be pulp. This is supposed to be stuff you're just like, fuck it. Let's get to the part where it's like fucking fucked up. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's a zombie. He's got worms and creepy crawlies all over him. You know, we relish the effects shots like Abe just sort of alluded to. And he kills Aunt Bedelia. I forget how. It kind of doesn't.
He strangles
Oh
her.
yeah, he
as we
just
fade
chokes
out.
her. So, but the big takeaway is that he's yelling for his Father's Day cake, which he was doing when she murdered him. And every year it was one of her hated things, right? As he would yell, "Where's my cake, you dirty bitch? Where's my cake?" And one by one, in a silly fashion, I would argue,
Yeah.
the rich socialites go to look for whoever was last went out. Like, hey, where's Bedelia? And Ed Harris, we get to see him disco dance for a while, which
Holy
is truly
shit,
worth
dude.
watching the whole movie. just for that.
1982, and it's entirely serious. It's
Young
just
Ed
like,
Harris
look at
seriously
these
disco
two
dancing.
hot bodies do some disco moves.
Knowing that his career depends on doing the good disco dance right now in this moment. He's a young man just starting out. Very interesting to see. But like, he's like, I'll check on her. And then he gets killed. And they're like, send the maid out to check on him. And he gets killed. And one by one, they do this until we see the zombie snap as you said, I barely know who's related to who, but like the main
Sylvia, the other
middle
aunt,
generation. Yeah,
the
the
not
daughter.
murderous aunt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Snaps her neck, and we cut away, and there's only 2 people left alive. And
I want my cake.
they're like, what's that weird sound? It sounds like a zombie. And he walks in, and he's got the person's head, which he ripped off, on a silver platter covered in frosting and candles. And they
Which
scream,
is
and that's the
awesome.
end. Yeah.
That's
and he
awesome.
goes, what's he say? It is creepy. I got my cake. It's just something. Oh, yeah.
I want my cake.
It's like the end of
I
a
got
Simpsons
my
Halloween
cake.
special. He goes, Happy Father's Day.
Yeah.
I got my cake. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just unhinged. I love it. That meant that the zombie like did the frosting and shit. It broke off the head, put garnish, put frosting, put it on a platter. I just love thinking
Oh, right. Imagining it doing it.
the
Yeah.
zombie doing that. And when it freeze frames and it turns into right before it freeze frames, there's also something that this movie will do often, which is that it cuts to these kind of disembodied shots of like they clearly just shot it in a studio. It almost is reminiscent of a comic book frame or an anime frame where the lines are like, if someone's like running fast or something like in an anime, you get those lines all around them that kind of dictate the
Impressionistic
action lines.
backgrounds.
Impressionistic backgrounds, and they have a color palette that they choose, which is like this midnight blue and this crimson.
I love that each of the 5 is punctuated by one moment that is shot that way. It's a Dutch go-boed red, blue, 3D glasses shot. And each of those moments is, you can tell, in Stephen King's mind or George A. Romero's mind, that's the pinnacle of the horror in this sequence.
That's
we hit
the
them with
moment.
that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's kind of cool to me that they're all shot in the same way and that it's impressionistic.
It's like
but, yeah.
one of the only unifying things. But yeah, it's Father's Day and I got my cake. Happy Father's Day.
So then we
Oh my
transition
God.
back to the comic, which I also want to point out. There's a character who sort of presents the stories in the comic and in the movie called the Creep, who's the laziest ripoff of the Crypt Keeper ever envisioned, or to the point that I'm
It's
sure
just
Stephen
death.
King would defend it by saying, "Yeah, I know, I was referencing the Crypt Keeper," and that's
Right.
fine. But whatever. So we pan across the comic and we find a new story ready for our digestion called The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill, starring Stephen King himself as Jordy Verrill. Probably the most acting in a row that he's going to do on screen.
Yeah.
In his life. Maybe.
I think this is based off the short story Weeds. And it's basically Stephen King plays a yokel that finds a meteorite that is just laying out on his farm. And it's full of what I like to call Stephen King-isms, which are just like, oh, Jordy Verrill, you lunkhead, and stuff
you
like
done
that.
slit in shit and sat on it now, and just
Yeah,
shit where you're like, no one
That's
says that.
a meteor. I'd be
Yeah.
dipped in shit if that ain't a meteor. So he's really hamming it up.
It's got a Looney Tunes score. There's a visible animated comic page turn to transition sequences at one point.
It is full on Looney Tunes.
Yeah.
It definitely is. Unlike the others, which actually try to posit some form of drama or like hold up as like little mini plays, even though they can get ridiculous, this one is straight up like it almost feels like it should be animated.
And yet I
with
gotta
Bugs
say,
Bunny.
the animated quote unquote version, the graphic novel, this was the scariest one to me, the one that haunted my dreams.
Right.
The art is so much when you're not hearing and seeing, no offense, but Stephen King's like over the top, corny delivery. The concept of how would a lonely guy who lives alone in the woods, who's not even very bright, deal with cosmic horror is a thrilling concept. And what happens to him, which is that he accidentally touches the goo inside the meteorite, and grass or this weird green fungus starts growing out of everything that's touched, including the walls, the floor, his house, and his body. That was like astounding body horror to me. That it was really disturbing, and it's funny to watch the movie and be like, "Man, this is corny as hell." The comic is, it's a good comic. But anyway, in this version, he accidentally touches his tongue because his finger hurts and blah blah blah. But basically, it's like an alien life form, right? And its function is that it makes you itch so bad, and you want water, and water will extinguish the itch. But of course, the water's what it wants, so it can grow and grow and grow. And we basically just watch him like not do a good job
death.
and get covered in grass until he blows his brains out with a shotgun. And the only real writing maneuver is that he goes, "My luck's finally changed. I have good luck." And then when the grass covers him, he goes, "Oh no, I have bad luck." And then when he shoots himself in the shotgun, he goes, "I guess I have good luck." Or like, "Please God, let my luck hold out this time."
Oh God. Yeah.
Meaning please just let me die, which is chilling. And that, but not the way he delivers it, but in the comic as a concept, it's chilling.
Yeah, for real.
Very Lovecraft.
There's a few things I want to point out. One is that when he finds some of the moss on his balls, I think that's the implication because he goes,
not there.
Yeah. He sees his father as an apparition in the mirror, and his father is like the way in which I think that his brain is interpreting.
His father has to tell him, "You're dumb as hell. You're gonna fuck this up."
It wants but the father says in the mirror it wants the water, so
Don't
it's
you
clearly
know that? You idiot.
the
Don't you
alien
understand?
substance trying to take over his brain. He's a real piece of shit. You're also he also has this whole intercut throughout. He goes into his mental space where he does like, all right, this is why I'm gonna do what I'm doing, and like initially, one of my favorites is that
it shows you how he views the world, which is distorted.
he wonders how much he could get for the meteor at college, and then it cuts to a shot of a door that says Department of Meteors
with a guy who looks like Albert Einstein or like Dr. Wily,
like a
from
wizard
Mega Man.
though.
Yeah,
and he thinks he can get $200.
$200. Yeah,
and in his mind, he's a very good negotiator. He says, "Keep accounting." That's how he gets. That's how he beats the professor.
really reminded me of the Buster Scruggs segment, All Gold Valley, I think it's called, or All Gold River or something. Pure Gold Valley. You know,
the one with Tom Waits. Yeah.
Pan for gold.
Mr. Pocket or whatever.
Great. Yeah. And I do think it's interesting that he never tries to mow or cut or kill the greenery in any way. Never addresses the problem in even the most basic level. Just is like, what am I gonna fucking do about this? I'm gonna die. I'm too dumb to figure this out.
I'm too dumb to figure this out. I love that.
I'm growing. And I love that the other subtle thing that I did enjoy is playing on his TV at one point is a very famous monologue about pioneer spirit and the manifest destiny and the pioneers who took wagon trains west and conquered, America, genocided everyone. But
manifest destiny.
The idea that he's and it does take place in the past, and he's a farmsteader living hard out on the pioneer, and he freezes in the winter and he's burns up in the summer, like the woman in the monologue says. So I do think there's something there about, in King's mind, about the idea of a pioneer on Earth and a pioneer. The meteorite life form is also a pioneer, right? And so it's like a pioneer of the Earth meeting a pioneer of the stars, and it's like a different order of magnitude. You stand no chance. But they're both pioneers.
And additionally, another thing I want to mention is it's surprisingly dense when it's just the way we talked about this particular one. He sees a reverend on TV at one point, and I think it's important because the reverend on TV is doing a sermon, and it is that God has a plan, and it's a good plan, and it will be completed.
Oh, and it's inevitable. Just give up God's plan. He's what God has
it's a
begun
good plan.
in you
It's
will
happening.
come to fruition.
It's cool.
Yeah.
And I think that's gonna obviously that has a lot to
He's
say
doomed.
about.
Right.
He's doomed, and what does God have to say about that? And is that a good plan? These are
Right.
things that I think Stephen King, as he
That's
develops,
what I'm saying. It's
even from the outset. This is early. Like
it's
he's
a thoughtful
throwing
and well put together short
shade.
story, and the graphic
Mhm.
novel does it justice. And I would say this does not, in fact, do the story justice.
It doesn't. In fact, I think there's another version of this that's haunting, kind of like I think color. What is the
Color Out of Space.
that is a better version of that.
And King has done similar stories. Or I think he's dabbled
Yeah.
with this in the past.
I think it's a good trope. I think we need to see more of it. It's pretty cool. And we see
It's
a shot at
cool.
the end
It's
of a
cool.
road sign. It says Castle Rock, 5 miles.
Oh, and the grass is growing so fast that you're like, well, that's going to take over the earth, right? Classic horror ending.
Yep. Third
Yeah,
story.
it's pretty cool with the grass. Third story is called Something to Tide You Over. Maybe the biggest stretch of the title.
Mhm.
Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill is a good horror title.
Good horror title.
Something to tide you over, and it's about
Tide you
drowning.
over.
Is not particularly creepy.
Ice to meet you.
Yeah, basically, Ted Danson wakes up just exuding big dick energy, like clearly fucking some guy's wife. You know it before it
just
even
know it.
comes up. But the
Yeah.
inciting incident is Leslie Nielsen shows up at the door threatening and says, "You're fucking my wife." And he goes, "All right."
It's so good too, because
Okay.
all I do
You
is
know.
keep hearing Frank Drebin. Like because he has the same like stilted delivery.
Leslie
that he
Nielsen
always-
of Naked
Yeah.
Gun, of course, and
Yes.
Airplane.
It's amazing.
And I gotta say, much like when I saw Steve Carell in The Way Back, not a bad. I'm like, oh, he could have done villains. It just didn't twist that way or whatever. It would be interesting to see him do
Yeah,
villains.
he's kind of.
I'd be interested in seeing him do like Iago on stage and shit. He seems like he's a good actor, in fact.
That sounds fucking hilarious.
Which comedic actors usually do end up having chops underneath.
Well, I mean,
would say.
Nielsen was a little bit rare because he was drama first and then comedy.
That's what I'm. Yeah, and it comes
Yeah.
through in this. He's really
Yeah,
scary.
He's
and
scary.
he's a tall ass dude. And he also brought a gun, so he wins. And Ted Danson says, "We don't want any of your money." They're obviously both wealthy, and he's like, "She's gonna let you have it all in the divorce. It's nothing like that. It's not cheap. We're really in love. Sorry for that. It's obviously wrong or fucked up or whatever, but like, it's gonna happen. Just let her go, man. And you never really loved her." And he goes, "You know, I don't know if I ever really loved her, but I do know that I keep what's mine. And that's the point, Harry." And you're like, oh, this isn't going to go well.
Keep what's mine. That's your life rule.
Yeah. So, and he says
fuck.
there's no exceptions. And he takes him at gunpoint and says, if you don't come with me, something very nasty is going to happen to Rebecca.
Just jump in the hole, Danson. Just jump in the hole.
Yeah. Takes him to the beach. There's a big hole. He makes him get in the hole and he buries him up to his head in the sand. And a crab comes by as a little nice interlude.
Notable crab, I guess.
Not
yeah.
sure what that was about. Just they're like, that's scary, I guess.
Just to make you uncomfortable and feel
Right.
like, yeah.
You're
just
stewing
feel
in
it.
your crab juice.
Mhm.
But Leslie Nielsen comes back with a bunch of cables in like a golf cart and sets up this whole rig so he can both film
It's
him
amazing.
and show him on TV a live feed of Rebecca, who's elsewhere on the beach, buried up to her neck, even closer to the water as the tide comes in. So Stephen King's not bad at thinking of fucked up. It's pretty fucked up. So this guy's going to watch in real time as his lover drowns, screaming, begging for her life, and then he's going to drown. That's the plan.
Especially because Nielsen is morbidly describing drowning to him, saying
That's
like he's
what-
taking pleasure in this twisted revenge.
It really
and
is chilling because he vividly describes next this is going to happen to you and then this. And you're like, this is tough to take.
And he mentions like how you have to hold your breath for a long time, which is like, a thing that comes up time and time again.
Well, he says it's theoretically possible you could get out. Because if you hold your breath long enough, the
might
waves
survive
coming in and
every
out
time.
would degrade the hole to the point that you could pull out of it. But most people can't hold their breath that long. Good luck. And he leaves.
Mhm.
And he's clearly, it's not stated, but clearly jerking off to these films later. Or like, we see that he has a closet full of movies, and you're like, did he murder a bunch of people? Is this just the latest in a series?
Yep.
Because he has all these secret tapes, and he's like, the maid better not have touched my special tapes and shit like that. But
Mhm.
regardless of all the plot holes that weaves into the backstory, it doesn't matter because it's a short story. There's a really cool shot, I thought, of Danson's head in a tank lit by just a red glowing thing as he holds his breath as long as he can, gives up and dies. And I will note that Danson's, oh my God, I'm about to die soon and there's nothing I can do acting involves a lot of tongue work. Did you notice a very active tongue work?
Yeah, the tongue kind of slips
Danson
out.
acts
Like
through the
it kind
tongue,
of,
yeah.
it kind of like he kind of hints at the tongue first, and then he gives his full tongue.
That's right.
It's the Ted Danson way.
And with his last breath, he screams, "We'll get you, Richard. We'll get you for this." So guess what happens next?
They
It's
turn into
amazing.
zombies.
I love the rule that just because he said that, they're zombies now. So like, if I die, I'm like, I'm gonna come back. I have to kill Andy Richter. Like, then it will happen. Just because I wanted it so bad.
But you get the sense that they're like sea zombies, right?
So
there's,
they
like,
come in as nautical zombies, seaweed everywhere. They have somehow barnacles on them overnight and like crabs and stuff. I actually did find it really creepy the way they talk, because they talk like SpongeBob, or like they have bubbles in their throats and they say, "We want to see you, Richard. We come to the beach with us, Richard.
It
We dug
sounds
a
like
hole
a
for you, Richard."
bubbler. It's like a bubbler, like it's like someone smoking weed and they did
I can't even
Foley.
do it. Yeah, it's that bubbly sound. And you know what they do. They do to him what was done to them. And I guess since they're alive now and they have sentience and they're lovers, they probably go back to living in their mansion and fucking as nautical zombies. That's my guess.
Yeah.
But we don't find out because Leslie Nielsen just screams, "I can hold my breath a long time, you fuckers, a long time."
And this is
that's it.
another one where I really like now think about, like, they drove out to the beach because he had to drive out there like in a Jeep. So did they drive a Jeep, dig
did
a
the
hole?
zombies drive or make him drive them?
There's
and they sat in
also-
the back.
There's also a camera. There's a shot of a camera at one point. They're recording this, and it's got seaweed on it, which is funny, I think.
Yeah.
And then they leave him to die on the beach. So it's like there's a whole bunch of things that they had to do right before this. I love it.
That's true.
This is great. Fourth story.
Yeah, I'll save that for it. Okay. Fourth story is called "He Stretched to Find His Note the Crate." This is the one with Hal Holbrook, who I'm mainly familiar with because he used to tour all the time pretending to be Mark Twain, and my dad took us to that live show several times. He does look like Mark Twain if you think about it for a second, but he's young in this. If you don't know Hal Holbrook, he looks like a young Mark Twain. He's a henpecked Walter Mitty type. If you don't know who Walter Mitty is, I mean like a mousy guy who's henpecked by his wife, and it's a very male gazy trope that we used to do way more than we do now. But it's like, this guy's just like a shrimp and his wife treats him like shit. Man, she's just an unstoppable nag and lush or whatever. And that's sort of the trope we're dealing with here.
Right. Emotionally
He
abusive.
He constantly fantasizes about murdering her gruesomely. And it's unclear whether we, the audience, are supposed to be like, yeah, that would be nice, or this guy's crazy. But regardless, he's friends with another older professor. And that professor gets a call and is called away to the college because this janitor found a crate under some disused stairs all locked away and hidden that says Antarctic Expedition 1834. And he's like, that sounds like they would fetch meteor grade prices among our
$200
at
to
this
me.
college. Yeah. Or he's like, "Professor, aren't you interested in this 1834? Geez." And he's like, "Yeah, what could be in there? That's very fascinating." They hear some scratching from in the crate. This is amazing to me. The janitor looks in and sees two green eyes in the darkness looking back. And he says, "There's emeralds in there." And he reaches his hand in like he has to get them now. He has to have the precious
There's money in
emeralds.
this crate, baby.
Yeah. And a creature bites his arm so hard.
It's like a
that-
werewolf yeti type thing, right?
Yeah, like a mandrill with a bunch of extra rows of teeth. It's pretty cool, like a Wendigo.
Mhm.
Rips his arm up, I guess in such a grotesque way that the professor is shocked into not trying to help at all, because the professor just kind of looks at him for quite a long time going, I can't believe this is happening. This is nuts.
And meanwhile,
yeah,
the janitor, the janitor
just
character,
seems
is just
sleepy.
he's like, I'm gonna take a little sleep now, and then he's like, I'm gonna watch you sleep. Like they really pause for it because I think they want you to feel like there's also a suckling sound that's happening and
it's drinking
very
the blood.
prominent.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's drinking in blood, but it also feels like it's I feel like it's infecting or something. I don't know, but that's not.
Oh, maybe
true.
there's poison, but whatever. It ultimately drags his whole body into the crate and eats it. And I will say, to the story's credit, this is one of the stories where it points at its own plot holes, as if to say, this is a short story. It's mysterious. That's the point. Get over it. Because multiple people ask throughout it, because they're professors, like, how could it eat a bunch of people and still fit in the box? Or like, wait, how is it alive from 1834?
Right.
And it doesn't matter, right? It's a creature that you can't understand, which I actually think is effective when you draw attention to it and are like, that's the point. So it is horribly eating a series of people, basically because of misunderstandings. The professor goes out into the hallway and tries to tell a student. Interestingly, later, Hal Holbrook says there's no one and the campus is totally abandoned, which is why the whole scheme works at the end. And yet this one student was wandering the empty halls for this professor to run into at night. But regardless, he runs into the one student who must be there doing something illegal, I guess. And Bud is like, you got to help. We got to get the authorities. And this kid talks him into not reporting the death, which is just wild, by saying, well, no one will believe us because it sounds so crazy. And like, I guess
they gotta get evidence,
so we shouldn't
man.
even try. And he's like, here comes the kingism. They'll think we both went off on one hell of a toot. All right, okay. So he convinces him to let him, the student, go investigate the crate. And he sees all the blood. And he goes,
and I
like,
love immediately as
Yeah.
he sends him, like the guilt racks him, and immediately the professor is like, but if I send him in there, I bet he'll be fine. Yes, he'll be fine. And then he's like, no, he probably won't be. I gotta go in there. And then he follows after it. Like,
So now they're
there's a
both
whole
in there
scene
again.
where he's hysterically like finding logic of should I go or should I not, which I like. Not a lot of horror
just
movies.
so he can witness
that.
another second person get
Yeah,
eaten by
because
the box.
like in his mind, he's like, I'm not going close to it, but if someone's gonna go close to it, they're gonna
better
die.
watch
I
them.
better
Yeah.
watch that. Yeah.
So he watches this kid investigate and go, this is crazy. This is crazy. Wow, there's the janitor's shoe. I better reach for it and also get eaten. And he goes, all right, this is I'm not handling this well. So I need someone else to handle this for me because I'm not making good decisions. So he calls Hal Holbrook, his best friend. And Hal Holbrook says, come over, tell me about it. I'll help you out. They get drunk together. He tells them all about it. Hal Holbrook believes him and he hatches a little scheme, see? So he says, you look like you're really upset. Why don't you drink and drink and drink and drink until you pass out so I can go do my scheme? And he does, and the guy passes out. And he leaves a note for his wife, Billy.
He
And
drugs his friend.
Drugs.
actually.
Oh, does he? I didn't see him put drugs in it.
he crushes up some pills and puts it in his drink.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah.
And he leaves a note for Billy, tricking her into coming to the school because he says that his friend, the professor, raped a girl and she is so traumatized that she's hiding under the stairs. A horrible offer.
This is a horrible
We'll talk about it
offer.
more in it. But that she's so traumatized, she won't come out from under the stairs. And he'd like Billy to come, since she's a woman, to coax her out from under the stairs because he's helping him cover up the rape. And Billy comes, get this, because she thinks it will be so hilarious and awesome. She's so
Right.
delighted that she'll get to see drama. She's such a drama queen
Right.
that she's like, oh, I gotta see this.
I gotta see
Yeah.
this shit.
And he knew that that's how she'd react. So he's playing her. Meanwhile, he painstakingly, also, I don't know where he hid his professor friend. I guess she doesn't see him
in some
passed out.
bed
Yeah.
somewhere, I guess.
But he cleans up the murder scene. And Abe, why don't you take this one home? I feel like I'm hogging it.
Well, yeah, I mean, he cleans up the murder scene, which is he does a great job, especially considering that he's cleaning all around what's near where the Yeti is.
Oh, he
And
doesn't even
seems-
attract. I didn't
He
think
doesn't
of
even
that.
attract,
Yeah.
and like, yeah, so
It never
like,
bugs him. Yeah.
Yeah, so after the note, we cut to Barbeau arriving, and she's of course she immediately tears into him for bringing her out to the university at night. Like, what a thing to do! And Holbrook just lays into her and tells her, like, I'm gonna stand up for myself, and the girl's on the stairs. You go over there. Barbeau goes over there.
It's a little weirder than that. Just got to mention that.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, you piece of shit, show me this entertaining rape victim you speak of, you piece of shit. And he starts laughing.
Yeah.
And it's because he knows that he's about to murder her with a crate, right? And he's so giddy about it because he's a creep too. But it's amazing to me that he still gets her to go check and after doing that because it's so suspicious. And she of course she is like, why are you fucking laughing? And he passes it off successfully by going like, it's just so funny. When you see her, you'll agree. The way this rape victim is curled up under the stairs is very funny. You'll understand when you see it. And she goes, okay, I'll buy that.
And Holbrook,
I'll go look under the stairs.
And Holbrook at one point shakes her and is basically like, I won. And then we get this moment where it feels like it's
her
a hoax.
against the crate.
It's it's a fake out. Like, you just got told on. Like, none of this shit was real. But then the Yeti jumps out and eats her. Yeah. It's
interesting that he beats her against the crate after she says, if you do anything, I'll scream. And then she just silently lets him beat her against the crate for a long time.
Well, he says, I'll help you. And he starts screaming. So, the next morning, Holbrook tells his friend that, I secured the Yeti and I dumped it in the crate into a nearby lake. It's all wrapped up, baby. Except the last frames are that the Yeti is breaking out of its crate, which apparently could have done all this time.
But the grass that's growing all over the world will kill the Yeti. So things are fine.
They'll fight and the fog will be involved. The fog will roll in and just wreck up the place.
So he's like, don't tell anyone I killed my wife. I won't tell people that you killed that student because that's what they'll think if I tell them. And he's like, fine. Good deal. And they live together being happy male friends. Now that those gross chicks are out of the picture, dude. Now we can just play chess and party. Final bit is called They're Creeping Up on You.
A man, Upson Pratt, finds a cockroach in his otherwise pristine, to the point of sterile kind of house. He's an agoraphobe, and he's also very rich, that old trope. And he's also surrounded by tech, how he interacts with like kind of the outside world. And we basically start by seeing him telling one of his underlings on the phone that he's upset about this cockroach. And then we see another and another and another. And then while he's finding cockroaches all around his apartment, he gets a call. He keeps talking to George, and there's a little reference about his rival has just committed suicide
because hostile takeover of his company.
Pratt has destroyed him in the arena of business. And then he gets another call after finding more cockroaches in his apartment, that his rival's widow, Lenora, calls him claiming he killed her with the rivalry, and he's super unsympathetic. And I love what she says. I hope you rot in hell for this shit. Yeah, and I love what she says. She says at one point, I hope you get cancer in the worst place, which is I'm taking
dirty Verril's balls. Obviously.
Yeah, it's probably, oh no, not there. Pratt receives another call from his building superintendent. More cockroaches are arriving. We're starting to see this perfect storm form because the superintendent isn't there.
He's racist to the guy who could help him.
The handyman arrives and he's like, I'm gonna call exterminator, and he threatens firing him. So he's like an old Scrooge recluse.
I'm glad you said
basically that, is essentially one by one all of his powers, all of his control. Which I'm surprised they didn't do a thing where like literally the phones stop working, but I guess they get to that point when the power goes out because but
it's citywide. I agree with you that's not clear. It's kind of clumsy because the whole city's power goes out, so it doesn't mean as much, but whatever.
Yeah. When the rolling blackout occurs, the cockroaches start pouring into the apartment to the point that Pratt calls the police, who just ignore him and are like, hey, we got a lot of shit to deal with. He also tries to call Mr. White, the handyman who he was racist towards, which I love that Mr. White like kind of puts on like a minstrel voice because he's like fucking with him. He's like,
you
yeah,
got it,
you got
Mr.
it, boss.
Pratt."
You know,
Yeah.
you fucking piece of shit. But yeah, Mr. White can't help because he's stuck in the elevator. And so the cockroaches slowly fill like his sink. They cover the entire walls and desks.
Clog
And
up his technology. Yeah.
Pratt basically has to lock himself in a hermetically sealed bedroom, and he starts to threaten the bugs. I beat bugs like you my whole life. And he gets another call somehow, I guess, inside his bedroom.
I would say supernaturally.
Supernaturally. That seems to be the widow again, who says, like, I hope you die. And so we presume that she's to blame for all the cockroaches. But then, twist. When he turns around and he realizes that the bedding is moving, and we reveal more cockroaches, and he's locked himself into a nightmare.
Twist in the sense that it's the exact thing you'd expect would happen. That like just a
twist
straightforward
in that, like,
increase of cockroaches.
Magically creates cockroaches because
Right, the cockroaches can come from anywhere.
The cockroaches are in his brain, apparently.
Yeah.
Or are they? Because the next day we see a pristine apartment, so we think for a second that it was all in his head. But after a pretty rad prosthetic special effect, once again, Tom Savini reveals like the cockroaches are inside his body.
They all crammed
in his
body full of
hermetically
roaches,
sealed
yeah.
chamber. So, and then they fill and then like the chamber itself is completely full at one point of cockroaches. So it's like we are left with an ambiguous kind of like, were there cockroaches, or did he just have a heart attack out of fear?
I never even considered that they might be in his mind. There were cockroaches, I think.
No, okay.
And they filled up his body and they exploded out of him.
And then
because he was a bad man. Yeah.
Let's finish this with the final beat, or the second beat rather, of the wraparound story to end our tale. Some garbage men pick up cans outside Tom Atkins' house and find the Creepshow comic and start looking through it. And they begin to read it, and they notice that the kid took out a ad for a voodoo doll. We cut into the
I guess
house.
the kid must have the voodoo doll. Indeed he does.
Atkins didn't get any sleep last night. He's like, oh, my neck hurts. And we cut to the kid in his room stabbing his father's voodoo doll in the neck and torturing him. Credits. That's the end.
And saying, yeah. And again, can't stress how creepy young Joe Hill was. Like, would you like another needle in the throat, daddy? And stuff like that. Pretty good.
Hell yeah.
Pretty good. Which brings us to segment 2, Skeleton Crew.
Something in the mist! Shut the doors! Shut the door!
This is where we just talk about loose behind the scenes stuff, cast and crew.
So yeah, the actors in this, you mentioned, we mentioned Tom Atkins, who's the father in the wraparound story, Tom Savini, who has been, he's called like the grandfather of gore or whatever.
Legendary effects artist.
Friday the 13th, legendary effects artist, who also did his share of acting. But he met up with Romero, and they kind of stuck together for a long time. Ed Harris is in it, Stephen King himself, Leslie Nielsen, Ted Danson. Richard Gere shows up at one point, which is hilarious. And Hal Holbrook, obviously, who's Deep Throat in All the President's Men. So, and Adrienne Barbeau, who is, in The Fog and like a lot of different stuff at this time, and also married to Carpenter, I think, during this time. So there's what I kind of think is cool is when you think about or what interesting about this movie is it really does feel like a bunch of kids meeting up at college and having the same interests, right? Because Romero in 78 made Dawn of the Dead, and that went pretty bonkers, like box office wise, and he got pretty popular. And it kind of after that, he wanted to do one for himself, and he made Night Riders, and that itself did pretty well in terms of like the
also
festival
Ed Harris.
circuit.
Yeah.
And that had Ed Harris. And it had also Stephen King's in it because Stephen King came over
as the man with the sandwich.
Right. We met Hoagie Man or something like that. We mentioned in the frame rate with Soren Bowie on that topic or on that movie. And it's like very clear that they were all like doing cocaine and making Night Riders. And they were probably like at one point,
let's do some kind of creep show. Yeah,
we should team up.
Yeah.
And they did. And Romero would typically like kind of film in Pittsburgh. And this whole movie was made in like this converted empty all girls school there. And they basically turned it into a studio / like living space. And so it became this kind of like way in which you make a type of way in which you make a movie, kind of like a Cassavetes style, very, like free love, man. You know, like it's kind of like they're doing drugs and making movies. But
Easy Rider, Purple Rain.
Yeah, but this is
Now.
Remember, this for Stephen King was at the beginning of his kind of career in terms of like breaking into film,
Becoming the most famous writer of all time. And
right.
Shit,
He had Carrie produced by Brian De Palma in 76, and then Shining obviously in 80. And then he was in Knight Riders, and that was like his relationship at that point with movies. So Romero was like the first person to kind of get involved in that. And the cool thing about that is Romero himself they were also interested in talking with, and Adrian Barbeau is a good example of it, and a lot of the actors who were in The Fog, which is also came out in 1980, I believe. There was like a family there that was part of like the Carpenter verse. And so there was a bunch of phone calls from like Tom Savini, you know, who was talking to Rob Bottin, who did The Thing, all of the prosthetics for the animatronics in that as well. So they were like talking back and forth. So it really felt, I'm sure, like a kind of, you know, like a really kind of cool place to be working at the time, right? Like everyone's young, everyone's pretty like enthusiastic about making like gore and creature features. And this is kind of like, if there's any one aspect of this movie beyond its like, you know, writing, beyond just the movie itself, is this really kind of was a summit for a lot of people to arrive and kind of work together in a way that they never had before. And then after, they all had crazy careers, you know? So it was that's kind of cool to me, is that there's these orbital bodies just running around in the early 80s and then bumping into each other.
Yeah, the only thing I really wanted to add was about the order or the provenance, I guess, of the story ideas, as I talked about in the intro segment, which is to say that this technically doesn't belong in this podcast, dun dun dun, because it's not an adaptation of a King work. And that's what I actually think makes it special. It's just a movie written by Stephen King, meaning that part of the appeal, and I had to put my mind back in, you know, pretend I'm in 1982 and realize that this is not how I view the movie, but the movie, you'd be like, if you're a Stephen King fan, these were 5 new stories from Stephen King, you know, in film form. And it wasn't based on a graphic novel, as I so long thought. And the screenplay was personally written by Stephen King. So I do think it's a very interesting time looking at it from King's perspective, because he's always loved movies. And of course, as Abe said, he's had already his stories adapted by, you know, and then the big one that put his name on the film maps, you know, so much, having Kubrick, like the one of the top 3 directors walking the face of the earth at the time, adapt one of his biggest books that was a huge hit, right? So, and this is just the beginning of what he knows. Okay, I'm going to be a big deal. And I think exploring, am I also going to write movies? Is a really interesting thought to sort of put yourself in that mindset.
Oh, am I going to be in movies?
Am I going to be like a writer crossover, like Donald Glover, writer director?
Like,
yeah.
From his standpoint, he's had 3 movies made.
And it's interesting to see him tackle a screenplay himself. Yeah.
Right. Or he's been involved in 4 movies at this point. And the last 2, and including this one, the last 2 where I was an extra, and now I'm actually a main featured role in one of the vignettes. Like Stephen King had a lot of things probably on his mind in terms of like, what's the trajectory of my, you know, career now?
Yeah. And then I also think it's very interesting and notable as people who especially have done sketch, which requires you not a lot of endurance, especially compared to a feature shoot. But one thing sketch does really train you on is range, right? Because you're making 100 different little things and you want them to not all seem like exactly the same thing. And often with parody, it has to seem like a specific thing. So you have to do your work and break down, how does that thing work so we can pretend to be like that. And I think that's led us to our podcasting careers for sure. Like that's a part of the lexicon of why we can digest movies in a way that I think is interesting enough that other people would listen to it and enjoy that. So I do think it's fascinating that compared to Cabinet of Curiosities, right? Or Black Mirror, or even like Twilight Zone or Outer Limits or Tales from the Crypt, every segment it would be directed by a different director. And that's so you can get that feeling of range. So that every director has a bag of tricks that they tend to rely on. And with rare exceptions, they have a vision that seems to be plastered over their films in such a way that if you want a little anthology that's like a little box of chocolates with different flavors, you usually just have different directors do each segment. This is a compilation completely done by Romero and completely written by King. And it still expresses a fair amount of range, I would say, in the way that Romero, there are tropes that overlap, but Romero had to sit down with himself and go like, what are all the horror tropes at my command? And make sure that not every story is homogeneously pulling from all buckets at the same time, at the same rate. You know what I mean? So I think looking at it as that kind of directing challenge not only makes you appreciate it more, but makes it, that's just interesting versus like, I just watched through Cabinet of Curiosities, and because it's handled the opposite way, it's like a TV show where some episodes ruled, The Autopsy, and some episodes were like, whatever. Like the Skin Cream one didn't do it for me, even though I love Micucci and Dan Stevens, but you know. But even and comparing, I never get to talk about graphic novel anthologies, which I also love, but comparing it to something like Flight, which like there was a certain year in San Diego Comic-Con where all anyone was talking about was Flight, which was this anthology where a bunch of different comic creators who were big at the time did short stories based on just the prompt Flight. And that's a super cool idea. But I also think stuff like Harlan Ellison's Dream Corridor, which was a bunch of Harlan Ellison short stories that he adapted himself and painstakingly micromanaged to the point that all the artists hated working with him by the end and the series got canceled. That's also cool because it's seeing like the writer take full control because they have the clout and do everything. And, you know, sometimes it makes Jordy Verrill not sing the way it really could have, but it also gives you an insight into King. And that's what we're here to do. So I think that's cool.
Indeed. And I think that I think what was especially important is the fact that it shows some range and it's all coming from the same place, the director-writer duo, which is also rare for both of them. Romero always wrote his own things. This is the only thing that, in fact, he produced that he didn't write. And the same thing kind of is said about, I guess Stephen King, when it comes down to it, is pretty laissez-faire about how kind of his interpretations are. You know, I write my books, you know, but like, obviously this is, you know, step one of the DNA of a thing that he's writing. And he's pretty like obviously open to a collaborator. That's, I think, unique for Stephen King at the time. Were it an interpretation of a work that he had already completed and he like wrote the book and was happy with it, that's different. But I think that especially over time, King has shown a kind of wide range of being able to, you know, let go of stuff. You know, he kind of writes it and says that's done and he moves on. And I think that you can kind of see that with how they kind of approach and what the themes are in this movie that kind of, you know, resonate. You can see all the King-isms. But for that, we need to step into our next segment, which is something we like to call It.
Bill, if you'll come with me, you'll float too. You'll float too.
This is where we talk about the scene work, the themes, and kind of like any symbolism that we pulled out of this movie, which is unique for this movie as opposed to a different one where there's like one overarching story that you can kind of look at all the different streams that are happening and like say, okay, this is what they're saying holistically, like about all this complexity that's going on in the drama. This is not true.
And it's like Grindhouse. You're very intentionally, I don't think we should sit here and be like,
no.
What is the monster inside all of us that's in a crate? And the crate's the human heart? No.
It doesn't ask
because that's not the intention, right? They're not trying to meet you at that level. It's a fun ride.
It's a fun ride, but
we got to tackle it with that in mind.
Right. It's a fun ride for sure. But I do want to point out just the things that are clearly Stephen King. We have mentioned several times before, like we really consider him kind of like a modern Americana horror author because he tries to pick apart the things that we isolate when we as an American self kind of identify as different archetypes of America, from the Midwest to the coastal cities to the rich to the poor. You know, like he's trying to find these archetypes of characters that almost are in a way so basic that they feel like that they're always there, you know, like almost all of his characters and all of his stories kind of follow these trends. And this one also has that kind of vibe where he, in these short stories, since you're kind of like picking a very like you need it to be quick and you need it to connect to the audience with like a single, like, yeah, he's rich and he's reclusive. Now you know everything you need to know about him.
Well, there's the third. He's a mean piece of shit, and you define that out right away because they're like, this guy killed himself, and he says, "Oh, good, that will make the deal cheaper," or whatever.
Right.
You're like,
and I
okay,
think that
got it.
those are the two things. I think all
Yeah.
main characters in this movie are isolated somehow by their own making or due to just how they are. So you got an abused daughter in 1, a lonely farmer in 2, a self-imposed reclusive millionaire in 3, an abused husband in 4, and a man who suffers from like germophobia in 5.
And an abused kid in the wraparound.
And the
Who's
abused kid
alone
in the
his
wraparound.
room.
Yeah. So like isolation, which as we've kind of talked about a lot, like the concept of the outsider is very near and dear to Stephen King's heart, to the point that I'd say that it's like hard to find a story that he doesn't do that in.
It's scary to be in the dark alone. Alone
Right.
is a key word
Yes,
to
being
that
alone.
equation. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing that comes down the pipeline is that revenge and murder and the concept of justice in Stephen King's work.
And if you hate strongly enough, you will supernaturally just get your
Yes.
revenge. Yes, it's
And-
comeuppance city, baby.
He has this thing where he's like justice for the dead. Like there's
Yeah.
some kind of karmic.
You fucked them over too hard. Now
pushback.
you get fucked over.
Except when it's a Yeti, then you can get away with murdering your wife scot-free.
So interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Well-
don't know what that is, but
Well, I mean, that leads into something I definitely wanted to say briefly, which is
yeah.
I do think, even though you can't dig into the artist's intentions, or I think it would be disingenuous to be like, what was Stephen King's intention? Is he speaking to politics or philosophy? No. It's a horror story. But by virtue of that, right, it's a cultural artifact from 1982. And I think we're always speaking of our intentions and philosophies, even when we don't mean to. And it's interesting to analyze through the modern lens, just because you get stuff like, I did notice the male gaze stuff is very pronounced in interesting ways. Like, I thought it was very interesting that in the story, Something to Tide You Over,
Mhm.
not only is Rebecca not an established character with character traits that we get to know and care about, like obviously the
Mhm.
story is centered around the drama between Ted Danson and Leslie Nielsen, the two men, but Ted Danson gets a monitor of her drowning, and Leslie Nielsen even says, I didn't bother hooking up she's not watching you because I couldn't hook up like 2 TVs.
Right.
I have to point out that that's arbitrary decision making on King's part, right? Because he could just say he did set up 2 TVs. In fact, that would be more chilling that they're watching each other drown. But it's going as hard as it can to de-center the female experience. Like we don't give a shit about Rebecca. Don't even
And it's
think about it from her point of view.
objectification, pedestal making. You know, it's that kind of stuff.
And I'm not even saying King is like a piece of shit. It's for plot convenience, right? He can't have every character be well-rounded and get through in time. But notable that the default is let's view it through the male's point of view. And then that feels like a setup and payoff for The Crate, where I actually like the deconstruction that I think he is doing about the male gaze, because I think there is, especially in the 50s and 60s, the naggy wife with the curlers in her hair with the rolling pin chasing you, which is not a trope I think Zoomers are even like familiar with, but this trope of the henpecked guy who's a beta male. I guess it is, but it's morphed into alpha male, beta male bullshit. But the idea of like a beta male cuck whose wife wears the pants in the family and treats him like shit and is a nag and fucks around on other guys and emasculates him, right? And that she needs her comeuppance. And I feel like at the beginning of The Crate, I was questioning, like, is this a dated 1982 thing where the audience was happy that he shot her in the head and happy that he strangled her with the tie? But then by the end, when he's laughing about the rape victim, there's this moment that we reference where he beats her against the crate and then there's just silence. And this was also arbitrary, meaning the monster could have come out and eaten her immediately. In fact, that makes more intuitive sense. But King chose to have the moment deflate. Like for him to sit there and nothing happens and her to go, and I'm sorry, what the fuck was that?
You are pathetic.
You're going to physically abuse me now, you piece of shit? And I think that there is some conscious undermining of the male gaze there, where you realize that the horror of the situation is, Hal Holbrook's also a creep. Like, get a divorce, dude. Do something sane. Don't fantasize about shooting her in the head, you piece of shit. Yeah, everyone's a creep.
It's 1982, so it's obviously not enough. But at the time, you can see how it was like the pushback has already begun. What a lot of people might watch this and go, it is only like the step one, like fundamental, like woman hating. That's what this is. And it's like, well, yeah, it kind of is that, but it's also like they're trying to, as you said, kind of like deconstruct it in a way. Yeah. I think that's kind of interesting, but it is something that like King did show. It's that kind of middle of the road thing that a lot of popular authors and, writers get involved in, which is the 4 quadrantness of it all.
Conservative progressivism, where you go like
traditional values.
Yeah, I'm an open-hearted individual, but not like extreme. I still want to be 4 quadrant and shit.
Want all that. I still want all the things you want Disney.
Right.
So it's just like, it's just different iterations on a theme, different flavors.
Yes. Also in that same one, I love that I didn't notice till this watch through. Is this a John Carpenter score? Because it's a very sprungy 80s
I think once again,
score.
it's not.
I don't know.
Think.
Okay.
But it's, he's uncredited if it is, but I forget who they do credit. But yeah, I think once again, it's me. I was pointing out earlier how it's like people quoting themselves. Like, I think it's the groups themselves are like, I like you, man. I like what you're dropping. So I'm going to quote you on this level,
But whatever genius pumped out the synth score on the Something to Tide You Over is queuing off the fact that there's a moment where Leslie Nielsen, to show how crazy he is while he's like setting up his murder, whistles Camptown Races. Mm-hmm. So because of that, I guess, when the zombies are coming in, we get a creepy synth score with like sproing noises in it. Yeah. That is a dark version of Camptown Races doo-dah, like Camptown doo-dah, like with dread vibrations and shit. Very funny to me.
That. Another thing I wanted to mention, or like kind of last thing I need to mention, is the I like that movies don't really do this as much anymore, but I mean, it is an aspect of the anthology, filmmaking that's happening here. I like that, as we mentioned, there's like a moment in each of the vignettes that is like, this is the most horrifying moment. The terror really sinks into your main character, and they get their own little specific shot. With a wall behind them that is colored crimson and midnight blue, basically, and they have an expression, or they're saying or screaming or laughing, or the horror's really kicked in. And I really do think that this sets like the colorful comic book tone that allows the crossover for, like, you can see what they were thinking about. And we're like, how do we get from live action to comic book? And I really do think that Romero did a great job about like how action is usually covered in this movie, especially in the first one, where it's like kind of like, all right, like, let's get another person to kill. Let's have a lot of traveling, Ed Harris like walking amongst the great gravestones. It's kind of framed exactly how comic books cover movement, which is different from how movies cover movement. I mean, I don't want to get too much into it right now, but think of things like you foreground with perfectly placed tombstones that themselves are like horrifying, or like big, larger than life, like kind of dramatic angles that really use the space. It's a lot more presentational and a lot more, I mean, it's because it's being done by people who are trying to like maximize all of the different things they can do in frame, because they have complete control of frame, and that's where the kind of discipline comes from. But if you look at like the low angles and the high contrast and all of the things that he's doing about like separating frames and placing stuff in frames, especially when people are walking from one place to another, you can tell that Romero is trying to not make a movie, he's trying to make a comic book. And I think that I picked it up, and I think that you can tell as well. And it's not just the ones that freeze frame and turn into the comic book, like over the overlay. It's like he does it in his scenes as well. I think that's pretty cool. I think more people should do that. I think it's what Sam Raimi was doing during Spider-Man, and then we started to do it for superhero movies, and then we dropped it. But it's still kind of a cool thing that he does, and I think it's there.
Yeah, it reminded me a lot of Korean cinema, actually. And I think it's interesting that you brought up anime earlier, because I also think just the impressionistic background thing, a book I always pitch is Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, which has a great bit on impressionistic backgrounds and their history and various cultures and like what they do psychologically to the human brain. But yeah, non-diegetic backgrounds are very interesting to me. And I also think, yeah, we can't underscore enough that how ballsy it was. And in this case, I think effective. Like, it seems corny now, but I'm like, hats off to you for the boldness. Like when he'll block out huge portions of frame and it gives you something you never see, which is non-rectangular frames, arbitrarily shaped frames.
Yeah.
Like when the dad in the opening segment gets killed, his head is crushed and then we get a big black frame with just a little lumpy like amoeba shape in the left corner that is dripping blood itself, like it has drawn blood on the black frame, and his bloody head falls into that little space. That's just not something you ever see. I just think it's interesting to see like frames. I mean, people talk so much about Ang Lee's Hulk being like, man, at least he really tried to make it a comic book. I'm like, George A. Romero really tried to make this a fucking comic book.
Yeah, he really
it
did.
really is a comic book. And if that's your goal and what you set out to do, you nailed it for that, I think. And there's, people I imagine could maybe do it more polished or more to my liking. But I mean, you made the 3 to 9 major decisions that make it feel like a comic book all correctly. Like those signature moments where people snap and it's red and blue. It's like, it reminds me of the opposite of Grindhouse, where I love both of the Grindhouse movies, Planet Terror and Death Proof. But when you watch them, you go, this isn't really an homage to Grindhouse. It uses some Grindhouse elements, but it's just like a little interesting movie. That's a horror comedy in both cases. But, this really feels like it is actually a knowledgeable homage to pulp horror and that it knows what it's doing and that it's made by all these people who grew up ingesting and creating that content. And this is just more of it.
Yeah, you mentioned the polish, and I just want to say, like I said the thing about the superheroes. You mentioned Hulk, very good. If we want to talk polish, the actual winner is Into the Spider-Verse, right? Like that's how you made a comic book movie. You literally make a comic book movie. You draw it
with
out.
Truly non-diegetic backgrounds and
like
shit.
But if you really think about how to do it in live action, it's obviously much harder because you're trying to translate one medium into another. So, but it's just amazing to see how far we've come with the polish of this exact trope that we're talking about. It's kind of cool. And this is like rudimentary and really primitive, but you can see all the thinking happening behind the frame, and that's kind of cool. That's all I got for it. How about you?
I wanted to ask you something because you said you watched the shit out of this, and we were working on a comic anthology. I hope it still comes to fruition someday. But I noticed that The Lonesome Death of Jody Verrill is not unlike the vibe of your Civil War manor that gets taken over by those memory webs.
Oh, right.
And that the crate is not that dissimilar from I'm Helping, the genie one. And I was wondering if there's anything there. But you probably don't know the answer.
I mean, why? Obviously, there's got to be a psychology behind
the things you read and watch. About it, right?
I wasn't thinking about it, but they're like standard tropes that people want to play with. Thank you for mentioning some random short stories that I've written. That's not what this podcast is about, but I love you, buddy.
It could be,
but it is true that I think that and it'll probably be in my rankings. I won't spoil, but like. If you grow up with a movie, there's a nostalgia for it, and this is one of the king nostalgias that I had. Like this, Stand By Me, The Shining, like that's the stuff that I was like, as a kid, I would watch a lot, just because we had it around the house, and I think that's true for a lot of people, for King especially. Yeah.
Oh wait, and I do have one more thing. You mentioned it in passing, but I actually think the last one is based on Scrooge. I really think it is A Christmas Carol because I think George is the ghost of Christmas past, the widow's the ghost of Christmas present, and the handyman's the ghost of Christmas future. And he makes the wrong choice, and the cockroaches get him because he hates the little people. That's Scrooge's problem.
Yeah, he hates the little people. That's right. Yeah. And he's the reclusive millionaire. No, that's a good eye. I was only referring to his disposition, and you took it all the way home, baby. Let's get to where we do this stupid thing where we rank them, and now we're getting to 21 and it's like bloated as hell. But here we are. We're going to talk about all the different rankings of the movies in our personal version of the King Pantheon. We call it The Stand.
Time to make your stand.
The Stantheon.
The Stantheon.
I
So there's
guess.
21, as I said.
Mhm.
So how do you want to list these? How do you want to go? From the top or from the bottom, my man?
Starting at the bottom, now we're here.
Okay.
For sure.
All right. Let's just
Let's
Blam,
just go
blam, blam.
fast. Yep,
all
yep.
right. 21 for me, Maximum Overdrive.
21 for me, 1979's Salem's Lot for
Tip
TV.
of the hat. Tip of the hat. I recognize recognized game. 20, The Mangler.
20, Maximum Overdrive.
Yes. This
Man, that movie, I fucking forgot about that movie.
that movie
Jesus.
sucks. All these movies suck. 19, Dreamcatcher.
I agree. All these movies suck. 19, Green Mile.
Yeah, you really hated Green Mile.
I hate Green Mile.
18, Salem's Lot.
18, Dreamcatcher.
Yep. So we're all
Mhm.
except for Green Mile, which I placed higher. 17, Thinner.
17, Children of the Corn.
Yeah, that's fair. I put it higher. 16, The Dark Tower.
I put that much higher. 16, Desperation.
Yeah, all right. 15, The Dead Zone.
My 15's The Mangler.
That makes sense.
It was fun.
14, I put 1990's It.
So did I.
I know, we both really didn't like that movie.
Not that fun, but well made.
I mean, great story, as we talked about on the
Right.
podcast. Great story, just really poorly made film. Children of the Corn is my 13.
Lucky 13, Dead Zone.
All right. Number 12, I gave to Christine, which is maybe heresy.
I gave it to Thinner.
Yeah, that's fair. 11, this is where I put Desperation. I actually kind of like that
Oh,
movie.
yeah. 11, Running Man for me.
And
The
that takes me
Schwarzenegger.
to number 10, which I bolstered it up, but I'm really putting it in the middle of the road. I put Creepshow at 10.
Oh, which makes it your dividing point. Okay.
That's my dividing point, actually.
All right. So the almost no tension left in this segment, but still a little. My number 10 is Christine, the Haunted Car movie.
All right. So you put it about, yeah.
Mhm.
Number 9 for me is The Green Mile.
Number 9 for me is Apt Pupil.
All
Creepshow's
right.
still creeping up on you. Go, man,
Mhm.
go.
Number 8 is Apt Pupil for me.
Number 8 is Dark Tower for me. That one's too high. I should move it down.
Number 7 for me is 1408.
Number 7 is Creepshow. Creepshow. Number 7. Not too shabby of a showing for today's
Creepshow.
entry. Yeah.
Wow, you put it on 7. I put it at 10. You put it at 7. That's fair. Number 6. Let's finish this out. Running Man for me.
Now it's just gravy, baby. Number
just
6,
gravy.
1408.
All right, and then The Mist is 5. The Mist is 5.
The Mist is 5.
Number 4, I put Dr. Sleep. I think
Number
you put
4, I put Misery.
Yeah, I'm calling it. Number 3, I put Misery.
Number 3,
You
I put Stand By Me.
Oh yeah, that's right. You put Dr. Sleep on number 2, and I put Stand By Me.
I put number 2 as Dr. Sleep. Number 1's
Which
The
makes
Shining.
number
Number 1's The
1
Shining.
The Shining.
Yeah.
That's-
So interesting that in mine, The Shining franchise is where it's at for me, I guess.
The Shining franchise is where it's at. That
Mm-hmm.
you're not wrong about that. And I don't know, if it wasn't that Stand By Me and Misery were such like important movies to me growing up, like watching them and going, this really made me feel something, that resonates. Dr.
Yeah.
Sleep was a late addition. It's a very good movie, and maybe it should be higher than Misery or Stand By Me, but I don't know. And that's just the way it.
That's the way the stand crumbles. Yep.
That's the
We're done.
episode. We
Mhm.
did Creepshow.
Creepshow. Pretty good.
Woo! Well done, sir.
Yeah.
What else do we do? Do we just sit here? Do we just sit here and stare at the
Just
wall until the
enjoy a
next
beer,
podcast?
hit Stephen King's children. Yeah. Who are our age. Get in a bar fight with Joe Hill. Fucking drink a beer and stare at the fucking wall. Good night, everybody. No,
Bye.
if you love us, you can find more podcasts on many different subjects behind the paywall over at patreon.com/smallbeans. You'll get Escape from the Multiverse, Star Trek The Next Futurama, Spiel Boys. I think that's all the paywall ones. Yeah,
there's
but
some
that's
bonus
good.
episodes.
Good enough. And bonus episodes of other stuff, like I'll show you mine if you show me yours. As well as our movie diaries about the film we're trying to make, Papa Bear. If you're interested in information about that, reach out. You can always reach out at allthesmallbeans@gmail.com. Yes, it's a Blink-182 joke. Otherwise, you can search around our Patreon page for stuff on Papa Bear or check out the video production, the movie production diaries for more on that. I think that is a sode. Yeah.
That is indeed. Well done, sir.
Yeah.
Well
Till
done.
we king again. Clink. This has been a Small Beans endeavor. We're a bunch of pals who make podcasts, sketches, music, web series, and movies. The Beans always have new ideas percolating, so make sure to check us out at patreon.com/smallbeans. That's patreon.com/smallbeans, where you can browse all of our current and past content, see what we've got planned in the future, and learn how your support can help the small beans grow into huge, giant monster beans. If you enjoyed this content module, please like, rate, subscribe, or tell a friend about us. We love you.